Hello, and welcome to Mechanicsburg Mystery Presents a conversation with Maureen Jennings. Many of you know that Maureen Jennings is best known for her Murdoch mystery series, now going through 7 books, and a wildly popular TV show that is now in its 15th season. She has also written a number of other series involving Tom Tyler and Christine Morris, and a new one starring Charlotte Frayne, of which the first book here is Heat Wave, is already out. There is a second book in the series called November Rain, and there's going to be a third book in the series coming out in September called Cold Snap. And we're going to be talking to her about Murdoch and about Charlotte and about anything else that comes to mind. So, Maureen, thank you so much for coming on the show.
I'm very happy to do that, Bill. Hello.
Hello.
Chilly, Toronto.
Yeah.
Not here, it's chilly. It's more Cold Snap right now.
Oh, right. Yes, because are you up in Toronto? Is that it? Or are you somewhere around there?
Right in the middle thereof, Toronto. Yeah. We were pretty central. Yeah.
Yeah. Have they adopted you as a favorite daughter because of the Murdoch series?
No. That's a good point. No.
Ungrateful to you. Ungrateful. How ungrateful.
Hey, come on.
You know, it wouldn't be too much. A little plaque, a statue, maybe, you know, a Maureen Jennings Day, because you put Toronto on the map as a breathing, living literary city, just like Raymond Chandler did for Los Angeles.
Right. I think my hesitation was only because, as we know, Murdoch Mysteries is set in Toronto, where we keep saying it's Toronto, but it's filmed in different places because the Toronto of that time has a lot of it's gone. And I'm sure that's true across North America, those new developments, condos, et cetera. So no, I don't think they particularly see me as a Toronto resident exactly, but I'll remind them. I think I'll remind them.
Maybe we'll have to. Now, regarding Inspector Murdoch, do you have the same feeling that Conan Doyle had for Sherlock Holmes, that he was something that you had to pull out in order to continue to make money?
A little bit. I must say, I understand that before I was always writing it all. And then, of course, hearing that Conan Doyle was like, oh, please, and Murdoch, Sherlock Holmes, blah, blah, blah. But I can understand that because, especially having the TV series, which is actually, we just got renewed. So we're into 16 years, and that's a long time. And I feel not exactly rivalrous with my own creation, but I can understand that feeling of like, can I do something else now? And feeling like you have to let it go and let that show do its own thing and get credit for itself. But it's a funny relationship. I don't think I've talked to many people who have that kind of relationship with their own creation, but it's very different. Nothing I expected at all. I mean, I'm very glad, but it wasn't expected.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a very wildly popular show. Apparently it's in 110 countries, if I understand right.
Yes.
And like you say, 16 seasons. That's almost as long as The Simpsons have been on the air. That's a wild success. And I guess it's kind of fortunate in a way, because you can still write. You've only written 7 novels and a novella. The latest one, as a matter of fact, I had just read. I mean, this came out a few years ago. Let Darkness Bury the Dead, and this was that was stunning, absolutely stunning book. About World War I veterans coming back, including Jack Murdoch and the things that have happened to them and what they see. That. Also, what I guess I found interesting about this is that Jack reappears in the Charlotte Frayne series, right?
Yes. again, I'm sure a lot of writers would understand this. One creates a world, and I want it to be real, and I also sort of like it. So when you have your characters, say in this case it was 19 years ago, and I wanted them to continue, so I brought back Jack Murdoch, who is William Murdoch's son in the books, um, because I wanted that continuation of life, and hopefully it will feel real. That, of course, he has a son, and it would be likely he'd be a police officer. And so he meets up with my private investigator, Charlotte Frayne, and that was fun, actually. I liked creating that.
Yeah. And to be honest, he has a minor role in the story. This is really about Charlotte. So, it is a nice callback. Yeah. A very nice callback. Speaking of which, why don't you introduce Charlotte to the readers who have not picked up Heat Wave or November Rain? What is she like?
Again, I wanted to take a little bit of a step forward, but also be true to the time. And I said it in the first book's 1936, which was very, very turbulent. And one often sees these parallels to now, unfortunately, the unfortunate things, very turbulent. And women police, I would have made her a police officer, but there were very few at that time, and they were very limited. It was typically lost children and sorrowing women, which was okay, but limiting. So I decided to make her a private investigator, which I thought would give her a little bit more freedom to move about and do things. And also I love that time period of the noir period in the genre, Chandler and Hammett, and I like that. So I made her a PI and put her again in Toronto. And I'm always very grateful. I really am, Bill, that I can almost have an excuse to research it. You don't need an excuse, but I find out such a lot when I'm working on a book. So I'm starting to say, 36. For example, the stimulus for the first book, which I didn't know at the time, was that in 1936, July, there was the worst heat wave that North America had ever known. Now, not just Toronto, but North America. Absolutely phenomenally high temperatures. So I like that. I thought, okay, we'll start there. What's it like to be, we know it gets very hot here, but to be in an unrelenting, over the top, record breaking heat wave, I brought that into the story. And how did it affect people? And there were a lot of the divisions that were already there started to show, because there were typically, apparently, protests about people going to the lake to cool off, and they actually were not behaving properly. This is a literal quote, they were changing their clothes in the car. You go, what? I mean, I like that. I like that sort of conflict of what was the attitude at the time to people who were often, in that instance, it was typically immigrants, the whole clash again of the other, the newcomer, who weren't following the rules. And of course, people tried to cool off because there was virtually no air conditioning in houses at the time, except a few places, and only if you were very wealthy. So where could you go? And a lot of people died from heat prostration, over 200 across the country. So I liked all that. I liked all that as color into the actual story, the mystery genre story. So
Yeah.
there's Charlotte kind of, it's hot here.
Well, yes, if anybody who has had to work outdoors in hot weather have come to realize just how emotionally draining and physically draining it can be.
Yes,
So,
yes, absolutely.
well, one mystery that you can solve for me as well is that it's Charlotte Frayne, but it's actually called the series is set around the Paradise Cafe. So what's the story behind that?
Well, I'm glad you asked about that. Oh dear. Okay, I'm just saying oh dear because back to Let Darkness Bury the Dead, I introduced these returning, these soldiers. And again, what I follow is what goes boom. And I'm reading lots and lots and lots, and what goes, wow. So back in 1917, 18, there was a prisoner of war camp in Germany. And what I discovered was that, like anywhere else, they were not well treated, on a virtual starvation diet. And I found that very touching. So in that book, they're talking about the fact that when they were very hungry, they would talk about food. And at the time, that seemed strange to me. I've since learned that this is very, very common. So rather than just not, let's not think about it, they would actually share food, stories of food with each other. And so that really got to me. I'm not actually a foodie, food's food, but I thought that was interesting. So I put that in that book, and I had those men decide at some point that when they could, if they survived, when they could, they would create a cafe, because when they remember the food that they had loved, they'd say it was paradise. So there they start the cafe, and that gave me a chance to explore again the time period. And this might sound again quirky because I'm not a foodie, but I love looking at recipes and menus. What did you eat? What did you have for lunch today? So anyway, so that's why it's called the Paradise Cafe, because these men who are now in their late 30s, early 40s, start this cafe, and they call it the Paradise Cafe, and it caters to people who don't have a lot of money, because this is just at the end of the terrible depression, and there's a lot of awful hardship out there. So that's how that starts. And I got more and more interested in the cafe. It started to become a little person, a little character. So that's why it's called the Paradise Cafe series. And in each book, it starts to become very important.
So it sounds like it's going to be a character just as much as the people.
Absolutely. It feels like that. I developed, or I say discovered, because it's that feeling like I'm writing it, but I think, oh no, I just discovered it. So they have a section in the cafe which they turn into a sort of theater. And that's given me tremendous scope to explore theater, entertainment, plays of the time, and what they're doing, and I really had a good time with that. So that's that's the one I'm doing right now, which is set just a little bit later, but it gives me a chance to look at plays. I just literally an hour ago was looking at the synopsis of a very popular American play called Do They Hear Us Now? I think that's not quite right, but something like that, which was considered at the time subversive. It's because it was about poor people. Oh, yeah, what are you doing? Advocating communism? And the woman had to go to the Un-American Activities, whatever that was called. What was it? Un-American, yeah. I think
House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC. I think I was a little later in the 50s, but I don't know. They might have started, and wouldn't have surprised me if they started in the 30s as well.
It said 38, but I thought that early as well. So I'm going to look it up again.
Okay. Is this kind of an outgrowth? I understand you kind of got your start in writing plays. Is that correct?
That's absolutely true. My story is that I have a very good friend who at the time was an actor working at this small theater, and he came to me. He said, "Look, they're looking for plays, and you like plays and they like mysteries and you like mysteries. Why don't you write a mystery play? And, all right, sure, why not? But I did, and I felt that was my first seriously professional step into being a serious professional writer, and it was great. It was a fabulous experience for me. So I wrote two for them, two plays for them. I've written another one and another two non-mystery plays, which I'm just now hoping will happen on stage at some point.
Oh, that's wonderful. So you're going to draw on those memories as part of your story writing?
The memories of, sorry, what?
Of putting on the plays. And I remember I did a little bit of acting in high school and a couple of years in college. And those times, theater people are interesting people. Let's put it mildly.
Yes. Well, if I may, I'll just share this story because I love telling this story. This is brand new. Okay, so this is my very first play, very first sortie into live professional theater. And we do this thing, as you know, called the table read, where everybody sits around, the actors, the director, the writer, and read the play. Nobody's seriously acting it. And by then, I had realized that I literally had too many people on stage because it was a physically rather small stage. So I simply said, exit. His name was in the play, it was Kip. Exit, sorry, Bindon. Exit Bindon. So, okay. So we get to the actor and who's playing Bindon, and he says, well, where do I go? I said, what do you mean, where do you go? You have to leave the stage. But I didn't at that moment understand the way actors think, which was you got to have a reason for leaving the stage. You have to know in your mind what you're doing when you leave the stage. And he said, well, do I go and look at the footprints in the snow? And I'm going, oh, okay, yeah. But it was a really good experience. And I've continued to do that in writing because I feel like even if it's not on the page, if I just say, Charlotte, literally, this is also true, Charlotte walks to the House of Industry. I need to know what she's seeing. I need to know, even if I don't put it in for whatever reasons. So it's that whole thing about what they call it, the backstory, often the actor's backstory, like, but I'll never forget that. Well, where do I go? It was wonderful. I learned so much from those actors. They were fabulous.
I could see that because they're asking the questions that are appropriate to them that you would not normally think of. And that's what makes you kind of a better writer because because your character's on the page, they're going to do whatever you tell them. They're not going to stand or do they?
Well, yes, they do. Yes. Unlike the actors, but yeah, I mean that made sense. If is he going to storm off? Is he going to slink off? Made sense to me when he said it in a way that I hadn't even thought about.
Yeah.
But I hope that, as I said, I learned such a lot, and I hope that's given my books dimension, as that people don't just float around, that they are literally anchored. And one of the things that I do, is I read the street directories. I have a street directory from 1917 and one from 1936, and it's really fun. You just, So again, Charlotte doesn't just go. I want to know she's walking by a laundry, or what would be another typical thing?
Oh, a tobacconist, a grocer, dry goods.
Yeah, they call them confectionaries then. I don't think they do now, but it was chocolates and sweets and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There was something about I had a question. Another thing about your titles, they're all weather related. Why did you decide to go that way?
That was strictly because I started with Heat Wave. The other books tend to all be quotations, often from Shakespeare. But in this case, heat wave, I liked that. And then I thought, okay, well, let's continue the weather theme, which was fine. And then in the newest book, I didn't know what the hell to call it. What was I going to say? Spring forward or whatever. So anyway, the newest one is called March Roars, because I like that, March comes in like a lion and exits like a lamb or something, whatever that is.
Okay, so that's going to be book 4 in the series then, after Cold Snap? Because that's Cold Snap, if I understand, is coming out this September, right?
Yes, it's been a bit delayed like everything else, but ready to go.
Okay. Are we going to expect to see more of Jack Murdoch in these books?
Yes. Well, as you say, secondary role, he's not going to take over. Thank you, Jack.
Yep. Well, it's so curious because at the end of Let Darkness Bury the Dead, he's kind of on the road to recovery a little from his trauma through the war. And, to jump from that to 1936 and he's a detective, it seems like there's a lot of story going on in there that maybe we'll see, and well, maybe we won't, but yeah. But the one thing that I'll go back to, one of the things that define your work, define your novels, is that you take on a very, you show a grittier aspect of life than you would find, say, in a cozy mystery, because in fact, this has more to do, I guess, maybe with the early Murdoch shows. When I was watching the first season, and there was a moment in which Murdoch and Julia Ogden were talking, and she reveals something about herself. She reveals a secret. And because Murdoch is a practicing Catholic, and to me, in American television, you don't see people practicing their religion. And that affected him because of his practicing Catholic, and it does affect their relationship over a long period of time. And I'm experiencing your storytelling and going, wow, that's something I don't see that often. And in your books, you do issues like child exploitation and slavery, abortion, Chinese immigration. Is that deliberate on your part, or is it just something that kind of showed up in the writing and part of your concern as an artist, as a writer?
Well, I absolutely have always loved the mystery genre. And I had one of the writers the Swedish writers, I don't know if you've heard of them, the Wallus. I forget, Marge Wallow and Perry. He died, unfortunately. But they said that they deliberately set out to write about Swedish corruption in the police force, actually. Using that, it's like the vehicle, the car is the mystery story. And in that, you can put a lot of things that concern you. And I really like that. It's a bit like, a little bit of honey makes the medicine go down. But I like that concept that this is a story and I want you to follow the story. But I, as the author, I just want you to also look at this or think about this. And typically, for me, it's to do with society, social justice, what's going on. And it's interesting what you said, actually, Bill, because we've had a lot of comments about the Murdoch show, that how surprised people are that we're depicting a Catholic. And it's kind of like matter of fact, in a sense. It comes forward sometimes, for sure, because there was a lot of prejudice in Toronto at the time around Catholics, but it's just, we don't do it very much. And I'm glad about that. I mean, I'm glad that people comment on that, because it should be in there somewhere. And I deliberately chose him when I started to write, I deliberately consciously made him a Catholic because of the discrimination, because it was a very waspy city at the time, very, very Protestant. And to have him as an outsider gave me a nice sense of drama, which was less so in the show, but has been picked up in the show as well. But definitely is a big factor in the books.
Yeah. Now, being the move to a new series, to a new character, were there challenges that were kind of unexpected were you worried that, say, the Murdoch fans wouldn't necessarily follow to pick up Charlotte Frayne's story?
A little bit. It's a bit more of the female, male to female challenge was obviously not as big as the second series I started, 4 books with Tom Tyler, which is another male. And I didn't want him to be like an English Murdoch, he's supposed to be English. That was challenging to make him different, to put him in his time, to try to be true to his time. That is the challenge. It's always, I find, an interesting challenge. I want to be true to the time, but also I don't want to. Now we're so different. We're so much more aware of things. I certainly don't want him saying things that are hideously offensive, which he may have done. But on the other hand, I don't want, say, Murdoch or Tyler to be so ahead of themselves that they're unreal. So that's quite a juggling act, which I enjoyed juggling. But it was easier doing Charlotte because she's female and she can get away with much more, I thought. Because we can all say, oh, she's progressive. That's good. Right.
Well, I think also being a private detective, you're not having to worry about anything like police procedure.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's talk for a moment about, I guess, writers in general. Were there any in particular that inspired you, that you found, or that you still find worthy of going back to and reading again?
Absolutely. I can remember, I swear, the moment, the visceral memory of going to the library. I grew up in England till I was 17. And I went to the library, and I must have been about 13. And I found Sherlock Holmes. For some reason, I hadn't encountered Sherlock Holmes earlier than that. I don't know why. But I do remember that moment of reading and go, oh, and I just read absolutely everything that had been written by then, Conan Doyle had written. And at the time, because it was England, there was quite a strict rule that you couldn't go into the adult section until you were 14. And I can remember begging the librarian at the desk, and I was like 2 weeks away from being 14. No, not till you're 14. And then I think they must have put Sherlock Holmes in the adult section, I think, because anyway, I remember the thrill. It was physically a different room. And I remember going to the adult section. I'd all grown up. I could read adult books. So the library, anyway, so Sherlock Holmes, Conan Doyle, I should say. John le Carré, I love. I read all of the classic females, Dorothy Sayers, Josephine Taylor, Marsh Allingham, all of those folks. And I wish I had more time. I now that I'm writing, I read much less fiction, only because of time. I need to do a lot more research reading. So I'm a bit sorry about that. It's a bit, I got John le Carré's posthumous book, which I haven't read yet. And I recently bought the book that Louise Penny, who's a friend of mine, wrote with Hillary Clinton. So I'm looking forward to reading that, but I haven't got to that yet.
That is true. That is the curse of producing books for a living, is that you don't have time to do what you used to do for pleasure. And do you find when you're reading, if you're reading now, are you actually reading for the story, or are you finding yourself looking at technical points? How's the characterization?
I try to switch that off. It's a bit hard, but I try. I just try to say, just read it, as you say, the way you used to read it, which you become immersed. I used to read sometimes on holiday 3 or 4 books a week, and they were almost all they were fiction mostly. And now I don't. I read what's my latest book? Oh, The Great Terror, which is a very apropos, unfortunately, about Stalin. Mm. And it's big. Nonfiction always seems to be bigger.
Yeah. Well, there's that about reading books like that. I've had a couple of books about Nazi Germany and the Einsatzgruppen, and some of that stuff can be really depressing.
Oh,
Just reading about what they were doing and the effect it also had on the soldiers as well.
yes,
Um,
yes.
and like you say, it has modern resonances as well, and that's it can be very difficult sometimes. Um, I think I touched on this a little earlier, but this is kind of a conversation my wife and I have had because she writes fiction and I write fiction. And she had actually turned to me one day and said, and she's new to this, she's much more newer to writing than I am. And she said, "Do your characters talk to you?" And I'm looking at her and thinking, in what way? And she said, "Well, they talk to me. They tell me about themselves. They tell their stories." And I go, "No, I have to sit there and work at it." Where do you
Right.
fall on that continuum?
I think right in the middle, because I completely understand where you want them to do this. And I understand what your wife says, where, you're working away. And then I always say they come on my left shoulder. I don't know why, but they do. And I'll be saying like, what? What are you saying? You think, what do you mean? But I think that the thing that I feel, and you probably both feel the same way, is that once they're out there, they're like friends. And it's really strange that you miss them and you say, "No, wait a minute, that came out of your brain." It doesn't matter. They feel like they're out there and you want to know what's happening to them. It's strange. Only if the other writers would understand that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
you become fond of them. It sounds strange to say that because it sounds sort of narcissistic. Like, well, I'm very fond of Jack Murdoch. Oh, okay.
Well,
but
it should though, because he's a fully fledged person. He's his own self. So why wouldn't you be? We see actors, we meet actors in real life and we have to disassociate themselves from their characters because we're a
no,
visual species. We see them and we see them as if, Robert Downey Jr. really is Iron Man. And,
true.
and
Absolutely.
I mean, I
I
wonder if Yannick has that problem.
He does.
Yeah.
No, it's true. No, it's very difficult. It's a real challenge. Because I remember the very first day, there were before the series, there were 3 movies of the week with actually a different actor, and they were really, really good in Winnipeg. So my husband and I flew out there because this is also new, and we were just arriving at the set, and out walked the actor Peter Outerbridge, dressed like Murdoch, smoking a cigarette, and I'm going, "Oh, there's Murdoch." It was a very strange experience, but very nice. But it was strange because that was the first time I'd seen him. And I did want to say, "Look, he doesn't smoke. Do you mind?" Yeah, no, I'm sure that it's a real challenge. You don't necessarily want to be always, William Murdoch or Captain Kirk or something, but that's how people see you.
Well, especially if it's an iconic role like that, because you can just look at Leonard Nimoy's memoirs, where he started out with "I am not Spock," and
Oh, is
then
that? Oh, yeah, yeah.
oh yeah, that was his first set of memoirs. He's kept trying to disassociate himself from the character, and this is after the show was on. I think just the TV show, maybe a first couple of movies, and over time, as he got to see what that character has done, what it means to so many people, and how much it entered popular culture, he kind of came around and he wrote another memoir that said, "I am Spock."
It's really a very interesting topic, actually, because I know that initially, maybe more initially for some of our actors, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable being, "Hello, Murdoch." I remember once, maybe Yannick had had a bad day. I don't know, but I think my husband said to him, "Hello, Murdoch," and he said, "I am not Murdoch." This was early on. "I am Yannick." Oh, okay. And I remember I trotted off to the one of the line producers, and I said, "Do all actors hate being called their character?" And he said, "No, some don't mind, but he didn't like it at that moment, I can tell you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I understand. Maureen, thank you very much. I think I've taken up a lot of your time here,
Such fun.
but it is fun. I really enjoyed talking with you. And I wanted, if you want to tell our readers how they can learn more about your books online, do you have a website?
I do, yes, MaureenJennings.com, usual thing.
Okay, that's great. That's
Yeah,
great. Well, thank you very much, Maureen. And this is Bill Peschel for Mechanicsburg Mystery Presents. And I hope that your favorite book is the next book you're reading, particularly one by Maureen.
thank you.
Bye-bye. The Mechanicsburg Mystery Presents podcast is sponsored by the Mechanicsburg Mystery Bookshop in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. The store is open with limited hours, plus we accept appointments and offer a drive-by service. The store will also ship books to your home, including those from the Peschel Press Mystery line, including our annotated editions of novels by Agatha Christie and Dorothy L. Sayers. To learn more, visit the store at www.mysterybooksonline.com. And thank you for listening.